The doorbell rang at 7:32 in the morning. I remember looking at the clock on the microwave, wondering who would come so early. When I opened the door, there he was, my son Michael, standing on my porch with a bouquet of white roses in his hand. The same white roses I used to bring to his school plays. He was wearing that navy suit I'd never seen before, the kind with the sharp shoulders and the silk tie. His shoes were polished so bright they caught the morning sun. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked just slightly, just enough for me to notice. I looked at him, then at the flowers, then at the black Mercedes parked in my driveway, the same driveway where, 8 months ago, he'd told me he couldn't help with the property taxes because things were tight. My hand stayed on the doorknob. I didn't move to let him in. He shifted his weight, glanced down at his expensive shoes, then back at me. "Mom, I know it's been a while, but..." "A while?" I heard my own voice, quieter than I expected. "It's been 8 months, Michael." The flowers trembled slightly in his hand. Behind him, a woman stepped out of the car. Young, blonde, carrying a designer purse I recognized from a magazine I'd flipped through at the dentist's office. That's when I saw it. The real reason he was here. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't love. It was the envelope on my kitchen counter. The one with the law firm's return address. The one that had arrived 3 days ago. He'd heard. Somehow he'd heard. "I'm Dorothy, and before I continue, I'd love to know something. Where are you listening from?" I always read the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, go ahead and subscribe, so I can share more with you. Now, let me tell you how it all began. 6 years ago, my husband Robert died of a heart attack. It was sudden. He was fixing the fence in our backyard one Saturday morning, and by noon, he was gone. The doctors said it was quick, that he didn't suffer, but I did. I suffered every single day after that, learning to live in a house that suddenly felt 3 times too big and 10 times too quiet. Michael was 32 when his father died. He came to the funeral, of course, stood beside me at the grave, held my hand during the service. For about 3 months after that, he'd call every Sunday. We'd talk about his work at the advertising firm, about the weather, about nothing important. Then the calls became every other week, then once a month. Then they just stopped. I told myself he was busy. Young men have their own lives, their own problems. I didn't want to be that mother, the one who clings, who guilt trips, who can't let go. So I waited for his calls. I waited by the phone like a teenager waiting for a boy to notice her. Pathetic, I know. But that's what loneliness does to you. It makes you pathetic. The house Robert left me was old but sturdy. A 2-story colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch. The kind of place where you could imagine grandchildren running through the yard on summer afternoons. But there were no grandchildren. Michael wasn't even married. The house was just me, and the memories, and the creaking floorboards that sounded like footsteps in the night. I lived on Robert's pension and a small Social Security check. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I could pay the bills, buy groceries, keep the heat on in winter. I didn't need fancy things. I'd grown up during harder times, when a new dress was a luxury and eating out meant a special occasion. I knew how to make a dollar stretch. But then the property taxes went up. The county reassessed the neighborhood, said our area was developing, which apparently meant I had to pay more to live in the same house I'd lived in for 37 years. The new bill came in the mail on a Tuesday. I opened it at the kitchen table, and my hands went cold. $4,000, due in 60 days. I called Michael that night. I hadn't initiated a call in months. I'd promised myself I wouldn't be a burden, but this felt like an emergency. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. "Mom?" he said, and I could hear music in the background, laughter, the clink of glasses. He was at a restaurant. "Is everything okay?" "I'm sorry to bother you," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "I know you're busy, but I need to talk to you about something." He sighed. I heard it clearly, even over the noise. "Can it wait? I'm actually in the middle of dinner." I looked at the tax bill on the table. "It's about the house," I said. "The property taxes." "Mom, I can't right now," he interrupted. "I'll call you back this weekend, okay?" But he didn't call that weekend. Or the next one. I sent him a text message, my first one ever. My neighbor's daughter had taught me how, but it just showed as delivered, never read. I waited 2 weeks, then called again. This time it went straight to voicemail. That's when I realized something had changed. Or maybe nothing had changed. Maybe I was just finally seeing what had always been there. My son didn't want to deal with me. I was a reminder of obligation, of a life he'd left behind. I was the past, and he was trying very hard to live in the present. I managed to pay the property taxes by selling Robert's old tools. He'd had a garage full of them. Vintage hand drills, a table saw, socket sets still in their original boxes. A man from 2 towns over bought everything for $3,000 cash. I used my grocery money for the rest. That month, I ate a lot of rice and beans. I lost 8 pounds. My wedding ring started sliding off my finger. Michael didn't know about any of this. How could he? He wasn't there, and I didn't tell him. What would I say? Son, I'm starving myself to keep the house you grew up in. That would make me the villain in his story, the manipulative mother, the guilt machine. So I stayed quiet. I learned that silence can be a kind of dignity. Winter came, and the furnace started making a rattling sound. I called a repairman who looked at it for 10 minutes and said I needed a new heating system. This one's 30 years old, ma'am. It's not safe. The estimate was $7,500. I thanked him, closed the door, and cried for the first time since Robert's funeral. I wore 3 sweaters inside the house that winter. I bought a space heater from the thrift store for $12. At night, I could see my breath in the bedroom. I'd pull the blankets up to my chin and think about the thermostat we used to keep at 72 degrees, back when Robert was alive and we didn't think twice about being warm. My neighbor, Patricia, noticed I wasn't turning my heat on. She'd see me outside in my coat at 10 in the morning, and she'd ask if everything was all right. "Oh, I just like the fresh air," I'd say, smiling like a fool. "Keeps me young." She didn't believe me. One day she left a casserole on my porch with a note. "Made too much. Please don't let it go to waste." That's how she fed me without making me feel like charity. Spring arrived, and with it came a leak in the roof. I put a bucket in the attic to catch the drips. Then another bucket. Then a pot. The sound of water plinking into metal kept me awake at night. A rhythm like a clock counting down to something inevitable. I knew I couldn't fix the roof. I knew I couldn't fix anything anymore. I started looking at my options. I could sell the house, move into a small apartment somewhere. But this house held 37 years of my life. Robert had proposed to me on that porch. Michael had taken his first steps in the living room. Every wall had a memory painted into it. How do you sell your whole life for 40 cents on the dollar? That's when I stopped calling Michael altogether. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. I was tired of hoping he'd answer. Tired of rehearsing what I'd say. Tired of being disappointed. I decided that if he wanted to be in my life, he'd have to make the effort. I was done chasing my own son. Months passed. I celebrated my 68th birthday alone with a cupcake from the grocery store. The candle was one of those number candles, a 6 and an 8 stuck together. I lit them both, made a wish I knew wouldn't come true, and blew them out. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling, and I watched it disappear. That's what hope looks like when it dies, I thought. Just smoke. Then, one morning in late April, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was a thick envelope, the expensive kind with a law firm's name embossed on the corner. Henderson and Associates, Estate Planning and Probate Law. My first thought was that I was being sued. Maybe the county wanted the house. Maybe I'd missed some bill I didn't even know about. I sat down on the porch steps and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter on heavy cream paper. "Dear Mrs. Dorothy Chen," it began. "We are writing to inform you that you have been named as a beneficiary in the estate of Miss Margaret Louise Hartwell." I read the sentence 3 times. Margaret Hartwell, my mother's oldest sister, my Aunt Maggie. Aunt Maggie had been a mystery in our family. She'd left home when she was 18, moved to California, and rarely came back. She sent Christmas cards every year with no return address, just a postmark from San Francisco. She'd never married, never had children. The last time I'd seen her was at my wedding 46 years ago. She wore a green dress and told me, "Don't lose yourself in being a wife, Dorothy. Keep something just for you." I kept reading. Miss Hartwell passed away on March 3rd of this year. As per her last will and testament, you are entitled to a portion of her estate. We request your presence at our office to discuss the details and complete the necessary documentation. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. There was a phone number at the bottom and a signature I couldn't read. I stared at that letter for a long time. My Aunt Maggie was dead, and I hadn't even known. Nobody had called me. Nobody had told me there was a funeral. And now, apparently, she'd left me something. I didn't know what to feel. Grief for a woman I barely knew, or shock that she'd remembered me at all. That afternoon, I called the number on the letter. A receptionist with a pleasant voice answered and transferred me to Mr. Henderson himself. He had the kind of voice that probably cost $500 an hour. Smooth, reassuring, carefully neutral. "Mrs. Chen," he said, "thank you for calling. I'm sure this news came as quite a surprise." "You could say that," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I haven't seen my aunt in decades." He made a sympathetic sound. "Yes, Miss Hartwell was quite private, but she was very clear in her will about her wishes. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details over the phone, but I can tell you that you'll want to come in as soon as possible. Are you available this Friday?" I looked around my cold house, at the bucket still sitting in the corner catching drips from the ceiling. "Yes," I said. "I can be there Friday." He gave me the address, downtown, in one of those old brick buildings that looked like they'd been there since the city was founded. "We'll see you at 10 a.m., he said. "And Mrs. Chen? I think you'll be very pleased." After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for an hour, just thinking. I didn't let myself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what kept you up at night, made you stupid, made you vulnerable. But still, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if? What if Aunt Maggie left you enough to fix the roof? What if you could turn the heat on next winter?" I didn't tell anyone about the letter. Not Patricia, not the ladies from church, and certainly not Michael. If it turned out to be nothing, maybe a few $100s or some old furniture, I didn't want to look like a fool. I folded the letter carefully, put it in the drawer with my important papers, and tried not to think about it. But I did think about it. Every morning when I woke up, every night before I fell asleep. I thought about that smooth voice on the phone saying, "I think you'll be very pleased." I thought about Aunt Maggie in her green dress, telling me not to lose myself. And I wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd found a way to save me from the edge I'd been standing on for so long. Friday came. I put on my best dress, a navy blue one I'd worn to Robert's funeral, the only nice thing I owned that still fit. I drove downtown in my old Honda, the one with the crack in the windshield and the passenger door that stuck. I parked 3 blocks away because I didn't want to pay for the garage and walked to the address Mr. Henderson had given me. The building was beautiful. Marble floors, dark wood paneling, brass fixtures that gleamed in the light from the tall windows. I felt out of place immediately, like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace. The receptionist smiled at me, a professional smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes, and asked me to wait. I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly pension and tried not to touch anything. Mr. Henderson came out personally to greet me. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and a handshake that was firm but not aggressive. "Mrs. Chen, wonderful to meet you. Please come to my office." I followed him down a hallway lined with oil paintings of serious-looking men in suits. His office had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a desk the size of my kitchen table. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and I sat down. He opened a folder, my aunt's name was typed on the tab, and pulled out several papers. "Mrs. Chen," he began, "your aunt was a remarkable woman. She was a commercial real estate investor, quite successful. She never married, had no children, and outlived most of her immediate family. You were one of the few relatives she stayed in contact with, even if that contact was minimal." My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. "She left you her primary residence," he said, sliding a paper across the desk. "A Victorian home in Pacific Heights, San Francisco, 3 stories, fully restored, currently valued at approximately $4.2 million. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Did you say million?" He smiled. A real smile this time. Yes, ma'am. Million. Additionally, she left you a portfolio of investments and savings bonds totaling just over $1.8 million. After estate taxes and fees, you're looking at inheriting approximately $5 million in total assets. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't process what he was saying. $5 million. $5 million. There's one condition, he continued, pulling out another document. Your aunt specified that the house should not be sold for at least 5 years. She wanted it to remain in the family. You're welcome to live in it, rent it out, or leave it vacant, but you cannot sell it until that period has passed. The cash and investments, however, are yours to do with as you please, immediately upon signing the transfer documents. I stared at him, then at the papers, then back at him. Why? I finally managed to ask. Why me? We barely knew each other. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. She wrote you a letter. I was instructed to give it to you after I explained the inheritance. He reached into the folder and pulled out a small envelope, the kind you'd use for a thank you note. My name was written on it in shaky handwriting. I took it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single piece of paper, and on it, in that same shaky script, my aunt had written, Dorothy, I remembered what you said at your wedding. You told me you wanted to travel, to paint, to learn French. Then you laughed and said, but that's not what wives do, is it? I never forgot that. I spent my whole life doing exactly what I wanted, and I was happy. Now it's your turn. Don't waste it. Don't let anyone tell you you're too old. You're not too old. You're free. Aunt Maggie. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and tucked it into my purse. Mr. Henderson was watching me with a gentle expression. She was a wise woman, he said softly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Now, he continued, let's go through the paperwork. This will take about an hour, and then you'll be able to access the liquid assets within 3 to 5 business days. I signed papers. So many papers. My hand cramped halfway through. Mr. Henderson explained things. Trusts, tax implications, investment options. But I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, tumbling, trying to catch up with a reality that had shifted so completely in the span of 30 minutes. When we finally finished, he stood and shook my hand again. Congratulations, Mrs. Chen. Your life just changed. I walked out of that building in a daze. The sun was too bright, the sounds of the city too loud. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. Then I started laughing. Not a happy laugh. A shocked, bewildered, slightly hysterical laugh. I laughed until tears ran down my face, until my stomach hurt, until I had to grip the steering wheel to steady myself. Then I drove home. I didn't speed. I didn't call anyone. I just drove, carefully and slowly, back to my cold house with its leaking roof and broken furnace. And when I pulled into the driveway, I saw it. The black Mercedes, parked right there, gleaming in the afternoon sun. And standing on my porch, holding those white roses, was Michael. I stood there in my driveway, my keys still in my hand, staring at my son. He looked different than I remembered. His hair was styled with some kind of gel that made it shine. His suit probably cost more than 3 months of my pension. And that woman beside the car, she was scrolling through her phone, not even looking at me. She had that bored expression people get when they're waiting for something they don't really care about. Michael's smile was too wide, too eager. It reminded me of the salesman who used to come to our door when I was young, selling vacuum cleaners nobody needed. Mom, he said again, stepping forward with those roses. I know it's been too long. Way too long. I've been meaning to call, I really have. But work has been absolutely insane. The words came out practiced, like he'd rehearsed them on the drive over. I didn't take the flowers. I just looked at him, then at the Mercedes, then back at him. 8 months, I said quietly. It's been 8 months, Michael. He had the decency to look uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, glanced back at the woman, then at me again. I know, and I'm sorry. I really am. But I'm here now, right? That's what matters. That's what matters. As if showing up erased all the nights I'd eaten rice and beans in a freezing house. As if his presence now somehow canceled out his absence then. I felt something hard and cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. Something that felt like finally seeing clearly after months of looking through fog. "Who's that?" I asked, nodding toward the blonde woman. Michael brightened, like I'd asked him about his favorite topic. "Oh, that's Amber. My fiancé. I wanted you two to meet." Fiancé. He was engaged and I was finding out about it in my driveway, from a stranger holding flowers. "When did that happen?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "About 6 months ago. I was going to tell you, You were busy," I finished for him. He nodded, looking relieved that I understood. But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how you could get engaged and not tell your own mother. I didn't understand how you could let 6 months pass without a single conversation. Unless you didn't want her to know about me. Unless I was something to be hidden, something embarrassing, something poor. Amber finally looked up from her phone and waved. It was a small wave, just her fingers, like she was greeting someone across a crowded room. She didn't come over, didn't introduce herself, just waved and went back to her phone. I wondered what Michael had told her about me. Probably nothing good. Probably nothing at all. "Can we come in?" Michael asked, and there was something in his voice, something that made my skin prickle. He wanted something. This wasn't a social visit. This wasn't guilt or love or even basic filial duty. This was business. He'd heard something. Someone had told him something. But what? The lawyer had said the funds wouldn't be accessible for 3 to 5 business days. How could Michael possibly know? "How did you know I was home?" I asked instead of answering his question. He blinked, caught off guard. "What? How did you know I'd be home right now at this exact time? You didn't call first." He laughed, but it sounded nervous. "I took a chance. Lucky timing, I guess. Lucky timing. Right. The same day I'd been to the lawyer's office. The same day my entire life had changed. I looked at those white roses again. They were expensive. The kind they sell at fancy florists, not grocery stores. Each stem was perfect. Each bloom tight and fresh. He'd spent money on these flowers. Money he'd claimed not to have when I'd needed help with property taxes. Money that suddenly appeared the moment he needed to impress me. "Who told you?" I asked quietly. His smile faltered. "Told me what?" "Don't," I said, and my voice was harder than I'd heard it in years. "Don't insult me by pretending. Someone told you about the inheritance. So who was it?" His face went pale, then red, then pale again. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Mom, I don't know what you're— Was it someone at the law firm?" I pressed. "Did you call them, asking about me? Or do you have a friend who works there?" He looked down at the roses in his hand, and I saw it. The exact moment he realized lying wouldn't work. His shoulders slumped slightly. The practiced smile disappeared. "Amber's cousin works in the building," he said quietly. "She saw you leaving Henderson's office. She knows what kind of clients they handle." There it was. The truth, sitting between us like a third person. His fiancé's cousin had seen me, made an assumption, told Amber, and Amber had told Michael. And suddenly, after 8 months of silence, here he was, with flowers, with apologies, with that too bright smile and that woman in the car who couldn't be bothered to get out and shake my hand. "I see," I said. I didn't move, didn't invite him in, just stood there with my purse over my shoulder and my keys in my hand. Michael seemed to realize he'd made a mistake. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Mom, listen. I know how this looks. But I've been wanting to reach out for weeks now. It gave me the push I needed. The push he needed. Not love, not concern, not guilt. A potential inheritance was the push he needed to remember he had a mother. I thought about all those nights I'd stared at my phone, willing it to ring. All those Sundays I'd cooked a meal for 2 and eaten alone. All those moments I'd told myself he was just busy, just overwhelmed, just temporarily distracted. "How much do you think I inherited?" I asked. The question seemed to surprise him. He hesitated, then tried to laugh it off. Mom, that's not why I'm here. How much? I repeated. He swallowed. Amber's cousin thought. She said Henderson handles estates worth at least $1 million. At least $1 million. My son thought I was worth at least $1 million. And that's why he was here. I could have told him right then. Could have said, it's $5 million. $5 million, Michael. Enough to fix everything that's broken. Enough to be warm next winter. Enough to never worry again. But I didn't. Because I wanted to see what he would do. Wanted to see how far he would go. Wanted to know if there was anything real left between us. Or if I'd been mourning a relationship that had died years ago. Come in, I finally said. He looked relieved, like he'd won something. He turned and waved to Amber, and she finally got out of the car. She was wearing white jeans and heels, completely inappropriate for visiting someone's mother in a modest neighborhood. Her purse was designer, the kind with the interlocking letters that cost more than my monthly groceries. She walked like she was on a runway. I unlocked the door and led them inside. I saw Michael glance around, taking in the worn furniture, the dated wallpaper, the old carpet. I saw him see the bucket in the corner, the one catching drips from the leak. I saw his eyes land on the space heater I'd forgotten to put away. I saw him see my poverty, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not sympathy, but calculation. Amber sat on the edge of the couch like she was afraid of catching something. She crossed her legs and balanced her purse on her knees, her phone already back in her hand. She didn't ask how I was, didn't comment on the house, didn't even make eye contact. Michael sat beside her, and suddenly they looked like a unit, a team, facing me across the coffee table. Can I get you anything? I asked, falling back on decades of hospitality training. Coffee? Water? Michael shook his head. We're fine, Mom. We actually can't stay long. We have dinner reservations at 7. Dinner reservations. Of course they did. They couldn't spare an evening for the mother Michael hadn't seen in 8 months. Just a quick visit, in and out, mission accomplished. So, Michael said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, tell me about Aunt Maggie. I barely remember her. He was trying to sound casual, conversational, but his eyes were sharp, focused, waiting. What's to tell? I replied. She was my mother's sister. She lived in California. We weren't close. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. But she left you something, he pressed. That must mean she cared about you. I shrugged. I was family. I suppose that was enough. He waited for me to elaborate. When I didn't, he tried again. The lawyer must have given you some details. About her estate, I mean. How it's being distributed. There it was. The real question. The only question that mattered to him. He gave me details, I said evenly. But they're private. Family business. I watched his jaw tighten. Amber looked up from her phone for the first time, her eyes sharp and curious. Family business, Michael repeated slowly. Mom, I'm your family. Are you? The question came out before I could stop it. He jerked back like I'd slapped him. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with things unsaid. Amber's fingers had stopped scrolling. She was watching us now, her expression unreadable. Michael's face had gone red again. What's that supposed to mean? He asked, and there was anger in his voice now, defensive and raw. I'm your son? Of course I'm family. You haven't acted like family in 8 months, I said quietly. I called you when I needed help and you were too busy having dinner. I texted you and you never replied. I waited, Michael. I waited and waited for you to remember I existed. And nothing. Not until today. Not until you thought there might be money involved. That's not fair, he said, standing up. You don't know what my life is like. You don't know the pressure I'm under at work, the things I'm dealing with. I had every intention of calling you back. Time got away from me. Time got away from him. For 8 months. Time just slipped through his fingers, day after day, week after week, month after month. I was eating rice and beans to pay the property taxes, I said, and my voice was steady now, calm. I was wearing 3 sweaters in my own house because the furnace broke and I couldn't afford to fix it. I lost 8 pounds last winter. My wedding ring doesn't fit anymore. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Where were you, Michael? Where was my family when I needed it? Amber stood up too, putting a hand on Michael's arm. Maybe we should go, she said softly. But Michael shook his head. No, we're not going anywhere. Mom, I didn't know. You didn't tell me any of that. You never said you were struggling. He was right. I hadn't told him, and that was its own kind of test, wasn't it? To see if he'd notice, to see if he'd care enough to ask. I shouldn't have to tell you, I said. You should have been here. You should have called. You should have checked on your 68-year-old mother who just lost her husband 6 years ago and has been living alone ever since. You should have cared enough to wonder if I was okay. Each sentence landed like a stone dropping into water, rippling out between us. Michael's face was twisted with something. Guilt, anger, shame, I couldn't tell. So what? This is punishment? You're going to shut me out now because I wasn't perfect? Because I had my own life to live? His voice was rising. That's not fair, Mom. That's manipulative. You can't use money to control me. Control you? I laughed, and it was a bitter sound. Michael, I haven't asked you for anything. You came here. You brought flowers and your fiancé and your expectations. I didn't invite you. I didn't call you. You showed up because someone told you I might have inherited money. And now you're angry because I won't just hand over information you have no right to? Amber tugged on his arm again, harder this time. Michael, let's go. This isn't worth it. Isn't worth it. I wasn't worth it. The anger I'd been holding back surged up, hot and fierce. You know what I think? I said, looking at Amber for the first time directly. I think you heard about a potential inheritance and saw dollar signs. I think you pushed him to come here, to reconnect, to make sure he stays in my good graces just in case there's money to be had. Her face flushed. Excuse me? You heard me, I said. You couldn't even be bothered to get out of the car at first. You're on your phone the entire time you're in my house. You haven't asked me a single question about myself. The only thing you care about is whether or not I'm suddenly worth knowing. She looked at Michael, waiting for him to defend her, but Michael was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Who are you? He asked quietly. This isn't like you. You're not this mean. I'd spent 8 months in the cold, losing weight, selling my husband's belongings, wondering if my son still loved me, and I was being mean. I almost laughed again. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think, I replied. Maybe I've changed, or maybe I'm just finally done pretending everything is fine when it's not. I walked to the door and opened it. I think you should leave now. Both of you. Michael didn't move. He just stood there, his hands clenched at his sides, his face red and his eyes bright with something that might have been tears. Is this about the money? He asked, his voice breaking. Is that what this is? You inherit something and suddenly you're too good for your own son? I felt something crack inside me. Not my resolve, but something softer. Something that had been hoping, even after everything, that he'd understand, that he'd see, that he'd be sorry in a way that mattered. It was never about the money, I said softly. It was about you not being here when I needed you. It was about 8 months of silence. It was about you showing up the minute you thought there was something in it for you. If you can't see that, then we have nothing left to talk about. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he grabbed the roses he'd set on the coffee table and walked to the door. Amber followed quickly, her heels clicking on the hardwood. She didn't look at me, didn't say goodbye, just hurried past like she couldn't wait to be gone. Michael stopped in the doorway, turned back. When did you become so cold? He asked. I met his eyes. When I realized I had to be, I replied, because nobody else was going to take care of me. He left then, didn't slam the door, just closed it quietly behind him. I heard the Mercedes engine start, heard the tires on the gravel driveway, heard the sound fade as they drove away. Then there was just silence. The kind of silence that fills every corner of a house when you're alone. The kind I'd gotten used to. The kind I knew better than my own son's voice. I sat down on the couch where Amber had been sitting and noticed she'd left a faint perfume smell behind. Expensive, floral, overwhelming. I opened a window to let it out. Then I sat there for a long time, my hands folded in my lap, feeling nothing and everything at once. I kept waiting to feel guilty, kept waiting to regret what I'd said, but I didn't. I felt lighter, clearer, like I'd finally told the truth after years of swallowing it. The phone rang an hour later. I knew it would be Michael. It wasn't. It was Patricia from next door. "Dorothy, are you all right? I saw a fancy car in your driveway earlier." Good old Patricia, always watching, always caring in her quiet way. "I'm fine," I told her. "That was my son." There was a pause. "Was?" "He left," I said. "We had a disagreement." Another pause. "Do you want company?" I looked around my quiet house, at the bucket in the corner, at the space heater, at all the evidence of how hard these months had been. "Actually," I said, "yes, I'd like that very much." Within 5 minutes, Patricia was at my door with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. We sat at my kitchen table, and I told her everything. About the inheritance, about Michael showing up, about the confrontation. She listened without interrupting, just nodding and refilling my glass when it got low. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Good for you," she said firmly. "It's about time you stood up for yourself." "You think I did the right thing?" I asked. She snorted. "Dorothy, that boy abandoned you when you needed him most, and only came back when he smelled money. You didn't just do the right thing. You did the only thing. Some people need to learn that their parents aren't ATMs." Her bluntness made me smile. Patricia had always said exactly what she thought. That night, alone in my bed, I replayed the conversation in my mind. I thought about Michael's face when he'd asked if I'd become cold. I thought about Amber's perfume and her designer purse, and her complete indifference to who I was as a person. I thought about those white roses, probably wilting in the front seat of that Mercedes right now. And I realized something. I wasn't sorry. Not even a little bit. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from Michael. 17. In 8 months, I'd gotten 0. In one night, I'd gotten 17. I didn't call him back. I made myself breakfast instead. Real breakfast with eggs and toast and coffee. Not just the cheap instant kind, but the good stuff Patricia had left me. I ate slowly, tasting every bite. It was the first meal I'd truly enjoyed in months. The calls kept coming over the next few days. Michael left voicemails. "Mom, please pick up. We need to talk. Mom, I'm sorry, I know I messed up. Mom, don't shut me out like this. I'm your son." Each message was more desperate than the last, but none of them said the thing I needed to hear. None of them acknowledged what he'd really done. They were all about him, his feelings, his needs, his version of sorry. On Wednesday, the money hit my account. I checked it 3 times to make sure it was real. There it was, $1,800,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having. More money than I knew what to do with. I sat staring at the screen of my computer, at those numbers, feeling dizzy and strange and powerful and terrified all at once. My life had changed. Everything had changed. The first thing I did was call a heating company. "I need a new furnace," I told them. "The best one you have. Money is no object." The man on the phone paused, then said they could have someone out that afternoon. 3 hours later, a crew was in my basement, installing a system that would keep me warm for the next 20 years. When they finished, I turned the thermostat to 72 degrees. The heat kicked on. I stood there in my living room and cried. The second thing I did was call a roofer. "Can you fix a leak?" I asked. He came the next day, looked at the damage, and said it needed more than a patch. "I'll replace the whole thing," I told him. He named a price that would have been impossible a week ago. "When can you start?" I asked. He started that Monday. For 3 days, my house was full of noise and workers and the smell of tar and shingles. But when they finished, my roof was perfect. No more buckets, no more drips, just silence. I bought groceries without looking at prices. I bought clothes that fit. I bought flowers for my kitchen table just because they were beautiful. I started a list of things I wanted to do. Real things, impossible things, things I'd only ever dreamed about. Paris, painting classes, a small garden in the backyard, maybe a cat. The list grew longer every day. I felt like I was waking up from a very long sleep. Michael kept calling. 17 calls became 20, became 30. Then they stopped. For 3 days, nothing. I thought maybe he'd given up. Maybe he'd finally understood that I needed space, needed time, needed him to really think about what he'd done. But on Saturday morning, he showed up again. No Mercedes this time. No Amber. Just him, standing on my newly repaired porch, looking tired and smaller than before. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked. He looked up at me, and his eyes were red. "I want to apologize," he said. "A real apology. Not the half-hearted ones I left on your voicemail. A real one." I crossed my arms. "I'm listening." He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was shaking. "I was wrong," Michael said, and his voice cracked on the second word. "I was so wrong, Mom. About everything. About leaving you alone for 8 months. About only coming back when I thought you had money. About bringing Amber here like some kind of trophy. About all of it." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, and I saw that he was really crying. Not the careful tears of manipulation, but the ugly, messy tears of real shame. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, my hand still on the door, watching my son fall apart on my porch. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort him the way I'd done when he was small and had scraped his knee or lost a friend. But another part of me, the part that had been cold and hungry and alone, held back. Words were easy. Tears were easy. I needed more than that. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked past me into the living room, and I saw him notice the changes immediately. The new heating vent in the floor, the fresh paint smell lingering in the air, the absence of the bucket that had been catching drips for months. He turned to look at me, and there was something in his face, realization maybe, or recognition of how bad things had really been. We sat down, him on the couch, and me in the armchair across from him. The same positions we'd been in when he'd come with Amber. But everything felt different now. The air felt heavier. The silence felt louder. I waited for him to speak, and when he finally did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Patricia called me," he said. I felt my eyebrows rise. "Patricia?" He nodded. 2 days ago. She told me what happened last winter. About the furnace. About you wearing 3 sweaters inside the house. About how you sold Dad's tools to pay the property taxes. He looked down at his hands. "She said you were eating rice and beans for weeks, that you lost so much weight your wedding ring didn't fit." My jaw tightened. Patricia. Sweet, meddling Patricia. "She had no right," I started, but Michael cut me off. "She had every right. Someone needed to tell me. Someone needed to make me see what I'd done." His voice grew stronger, more urgent. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know how bad it was. You should have known," I said quietly. "You should have called. You should have visited. You should have cared enough to check on me." He flinched, but he didn't argue. "You're right," he said. "I should have, and I didn't. I was so wrapped up in my own life, in my job, in trying to impress Amber and her family, that I forgot about the person who mattered most." "Why?" I asked, and I heard my voice break for the first time. "Why wasn't I important enough? Why did you let so much time pass?" He looked up at me, and his face was twisted with pain. "Because it was easier," he said. "Because every time I thought about calling you, I felt guilty. Guilty that I wasn't visiting more. Guilty that I hadn't been there after Dad died. Guilty that I was living my life while you were alone. So you dealt with guilt by avoiding me completely?" The words came out sharper than I intended. He winced. "I know how it sounds. I know how pathetic it is. But every time I thought about picking up the phone, the guilt got worse. And the worse it got, the harder it was to call. It became this terrible cycle. The longer I waited, the more impossible it felt to reach out. I understood what he was saying. Understood it in a way I didn't want to. Because I'd done the same thing, hadn't I? I'd stopped calling him, stopped texting, stopped reaching out because the rejection hurt too much. We'd both been trapped in our own versions of avoidance, circling each other like 2 magnets repelling. But he was my son. He was supposed to be the one to break that cycle, not me. And then Amber's cousin saw you at the lawyer's office. I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded miserably. She texted Amber right away. Amber came home all excited, talking about how your aunt must have been loaded, how this could be really good for us. Us. Not for me. For us. She wanted you to reconnect so you'd stay in my will. Yes, he admitted. She did. And I let her convince me. I told myself I was coming to see you because I missed you, because I wanted to make things right. But deep down, I knew the real reason. I knew I was being manipulative and selfish and cruel. He stood up suddenly, started pacing. And when you called me out on it, when you saw right through me, I got angry. Because you were right. And I hated that you were right. I watched him pace back and forth across my living room. This man I'd raised from a baby. I could still see glimpses of the boy he'd been. The one who'd brought me dandelions from the yard and called them gold flowers for my gold mommy. Where had that boy gone? When had he become this stranger who could leave his mother to freeze and starve? I broke up with Amber, he said suddenly, stopping in front of me. My eyes widened. You what? I broke up with her. 2 days ago. After Patricia called me and I realized what I'd become. He sat back down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. She was furious. Said I was throwing away a good thing over some old guilt. Those were her exact words. Old guilt. Michael, I started, but he shook his head. No, it was the right thing to do. I saw it clearly for the first time. She didn't care about you. She didn't even care about me. Not really. She cared about what we represented. The potential, the future inheritance, the lifestyle. When I told her I needed to make things right with you regardless of money, she laughed. Actually laughed. The room went very quiet. I could hear the new furnace humming softly in the background, a sound of warmth and safety I'd gone without for so long. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Michael continued. I don't deserve it. I know that. But I need you to know that I see what I did. I see who I became. And I hate it. I hate that I let you down. I hate that I wasn't there when you needed me. What do you want from me? I asked. My voice sounded tired, even to my own ears. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw something I recognized. The same exhaustion I'd felt for months. The weariness of carrying shame and regret. Nothing, he said. I don't want anything. I don't want your money. I don't want to be in your will. I just want a chance to be your son again. Tears burned in my eyes. I blinked them back, but they came anyway, sliding hot down my cheeks. Do you know what it was like? I whispered. Sitting in this house, night after night, wondering if you still loved me, wondering what I'd done wrong, telling myself you were just busy, making excuses for you, defending you to neighbors who asked why they never saw you. He was crying openly now, too. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't enough, I said, and my voice was steady despite the tears. Sorry doesn't warm me up on those cold nights. Sorry doesn't fill my stomach when I'm eating rice for the 3rd night in a row. Sorry doesn't answer the phone when I'm desperate and scared. Each word landed like a physical blow. He absorbed them, didn't try to defend himself, just sat there and took it. I know, he said. I know sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have right now. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. I found this a few days ago. I want you to read it. He handed it to me, and I saw my own handwriting on the front. It was addressed to Michael, with a date from 2 years ago. What is this? A birthday card you sent me, he said quietly. I never opened it. I saw it in my mail, set it aside meaning to read it later, and then forgot. I found it in a drawer when I was cleaning out my apartment. I opened it yesterday. My hands trembled as I pulled the card out. It was a simple one, with flowers on the front. Inside, in my careful handwriting, I'd written, My dearest Michael, another year older, another year wiser. I'm so proud of the man you've become. I know your father would be proud too. I miss you more than words can say. I hope we can see each other soon. All my love, always, Mom. I stared at those words. I didn't remember writing them, but I recognized the hope in every line. The desperate, quiet hope that maybe this time he'd call, that maybe this time he'd visit. I'd been so full of hope back then, before the property taxes, before the freezing winter, before I'd learned that hope could be dangerous. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I want you to see what I threw away," he said. "I want you to understand that I know what I lost. You offered me love, and I gave you nothing in return. You deserved so much better than what I gave you, than what I was." He took a shaky breath. "Patricia told me something else. She said that when your inheritance came through, the first thing you did was fix the house, the heat, the roof. You didn't buy anything for yourself. You just wanted to be warm and dry." I looked away, embarrassed somehow by my own simple needs. "That's what mattered most," I said. "Being comfortable, being safe." He nodded. "And that breaks my heart, that your needs were so basic, so reasonable, and I couldn't even be bothered to check if you had them met. What kind of son does that? What kind of person?" "A scared one," I said quietly. He looked at me, surprised. "I'm not excusing what you did, but I understand fear. I understand how it can make you do terrible things, or not do anything at all. You were scared of your guilt, so you avoided me. I was scared of rejection, so I stopped reaching out. We were both scared, and we both hurt each other. That doesn't make it equal," he said firmly. "You're my mother. You lost your husband. You were struggling. The responsibility was on me to show up, and I didn't. That's not equal. That's not the same." I appreciated that he understood that he wasn't trying to make us both equally guilty. Some things weren't equal. Some failures were bigger than others. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, I could hear birds singing. Spring was really here now, full and warm and alive. Through the window, I could see the garden I'd started planning, the small patch of dirt where I'd plant tomatoes and herbs. New growth, new beginnings. The question was whether Michael could be part of that, or whether he'd be forever tied to the cold, hungry past. "I don't know if I can trust you again," I said finally. He nodded. "I understand. I don't know if I can go back to hoping every time the phone rings that it might be you." He nodded again. "I don't know if I can be disappointed again. I'm too old for that kind of pain." My voice cracked. "I can't go through another 8 months of silence. I won't survive it." "Then don't," he said. "Don't hope. Don't expect anything from me. Let me prove it instead. Let me show up week after week, month after month, until you see that I mean it. Until you know, deep in your bones, that I'm not going anywhere again." He leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "I'm not asking you to trust me now. I'm asking you to let me earn it back." I thought about that. About the difference between trust given and trust earned. About whether I had the energy to watch him try, to risk being disappointed again. But then, I thought about Aunt Maggie's letter. "You're not too old," she'd written. "You're free." Maybe freedom meant taking risks again. Maybe it meant being brave enough to hope one more time. "Okay," I said quietly. He looked up sharply. "Okay?" "Okay," I repeated. "You can try. But Michael, I need you to understand something. If you disappear again, if you break this promise, I won't give you another chance. This is it. This is the last time I open this door." My voice was steady, firm, without room for doubt. "Do you understand?" "I understand," he said. "And I won't fail you again. I promise." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did believe him. But another part, the part that had learned hard lessons over the last year, stayed cautious, stayed protected. "We'll see," I said. "Time will tell." He stood up slowly. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Can I hug you?" His voice was small, uncertain, like a child asking permission. I stood up too, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the space that had grown so wide between us. Then I opened my arms, and he stepped into them. He was taller than me now, had been for years, but somehow in that moment he felt small again. Fragile. Human. We stood there holding each other, both of us crying, both of us damaged, both of us hoping this could be the start of something better. "I love you, Mom," he whispered into my shoulder. "I never stopped loving you. I just forgot how to show it." I closed my eyes. "I love you too," I said. "But love isn't enough. You have to show up. You have to be present. You have to be my son, not just in words, but in action." I will, he promised, starting today. And he did. That very afternoon, he helped me plant my garden. We worked side by side in the dirt, our hands brown with soil, laughing when he accidentally pulled up a seedling thinking it was a weed. It felt normal, easy, like maybe we could find our way back to each other after all. He came back the next weekend, and the one after that. He called every Tuesday evening, just to talk, asking about my day without any agenda. He learned to listen instead of just waiting for his turn to speak. Slowly, carefully, we started rebuilding what had been broken. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes I'd see him check his watch and feel a flutter of panic. Was he about to leave? Was this the moment he'd disappear again? But he stayed, through spring and into summer. He brought me flowers on Mother's Day. Not expensive roses, but wildflowers he'd picked himself from a field outside the city. He helped me fix the porch railing. He sat with me while I painted, something I'd started doing with my new free time. He never once asked about the inheritance, about Aunt Maggie, about the money. He never needed to, because that was never what this was really about. One evening in July, we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, drinking lemonade I'd made from the lemons I'd splurged on at the market. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for giving me another chance." I looked at him, at this man who was finally becoming the son I'd always hoped he'd be. "Thank you for taking it," I replied. "Thank you for showing up." The money from Aunt Maggie changed my life in ways I never expected. I booked a trip to Paris for the fall. I signed up for French lessons online. I bought art supplies and filled entire canvases with colors I'd never let myself play with before. I felt young again, alive again, free in a way I'd never been. But the greatest gift wasn't the money itself. It was what the money had revealed about my relationships, about myself, about what I deserved and wouldn't settle for less than. Some of my church friends thought I was too hard on Michael. "He's your only son," they'd say. "You should just forgive and forget." But I didn't want to forget. Forgetting meant going back to being small, being accepting of crumbs, being grateful for the bare minimum. I'd spent too many years being that person. Aunt Maggie had given me permission to be someone else. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who demanded respect. Someone who was free. Have you ever been through something like this? A moment where you finally stood up for yourself, even though it was hard? Tell me in the comments. I always read everyone. And if this story touched your heart, subscribe so I can share more with you. Because sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money at all. It's the courage to know what you deserve and the strength to demand it.